Oh, welcome to Vietnam War Memoirs. Today, we invite you to follow part 2 of the memoir of Vu Quang Dong, a North Vietnamese commando, Da Cong veteran, heading to the battlefield. After completing our specialized commando training, we received orders to head south. On a tiny slip of paper about the size of 3 fingers, known as the XYZ document, was written Destination Ong Hai Ku. None of us knew who Ong Hai Ku was, but we were filled with eager excitement. Our unit was designated as Regiment 2040. It took over 3 months of climbing mountains and wading through streams to cross the Truong Son Range, carrying over 30 kilograms of gear, weapons, and ammunition. We conquered the Nguyen Chitan Slope, passed through the Ba Dinh Pass, crossed the howling windy hills, and marched through pristine jungles where no human foot had ever stepped. Then we stopped by a river named Senanon to celebrate Tet, before pushing through vast forests of dipterocarp trees, buong palms, and endless rubber plantations. Sometimes marching by day and resting by night, other times resting by day and marching by night, moving for 2 to 3 days straight before getting a break. We finally arrived at the North Saigon Gia Dinh battlefield in late April 1969. The landscape of the Long Nguyen Ben Cat war zone before our eyes was not joyful and triumphant like in the movies. It was terrifyingly desolate. Forests were shredded and flattened by bombs and bulldozers, left in tangled, chaotic ruins. Bomb and artillery craters were dense, overlapping one another endlessly. The entire region smelled of gunpowder and bomb smoke, while swarms of helicopters buzzed back and forth across the sky. On our path, we occasionally encountered groups of frontline volunteers carrying 7 to 8 wounded soldiers out. For new recruits facing this scene, it was impossible not to feel a cold, creeping shiver down our spines. Before that, at a base in Bao Bang, our unit was split up into several groups to join new units. I and 7 comrades followed an officer named Su, a Hanoi native who had come south in 1966, to head into Cu Chi. The Iron Land and Bronze Citadel officer. Su told us that Cu Chi was less than 30 kilometers from Saigon, making it a prime target for heavy enemy devastation. The Dong Du base blocked the main roads leading to Saigon. This was a massive base, heavily armed with firepower and packed with troops, comprising the most arrogant combined branches of both U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Oh, at night, the sky should have been pitch black, but it was lit up bright as day by flares. An unknown enemy aircraft buzzed right over our heads, making a series of thud-thud sounds, followed by bright flashes without any explosions on the ground. Officer Su explained that it was a night reconnaissance plane taking photographs. Under his guidance, we crossed the Titin River, passed Rach Bap, and reached the Saigon River. Waiting for the tide to rise, we silently crossed the river. Thanks to our thorough training, we quickly reached the bank. We arrived in Nguyen Duc at around 2 a.m. Our base consisted of 3 semi-buried bunkers next to a canal. Since they had been abandoned for a long time, we had to work hard to repair and quickly camouflage them. By the time we finished clearing our tracks, dawn was breaking. Throughout the night, enemy artillery from Tan Phu Trung, known as the New Zealand Orchestra, fired constantly like popping corn. But fortunately, no one knew where their shells were landing. Just as we lay down to rest our exhausted bodies, we were welcomed by a deafening barrage of artillery from an unknown source. The jungle trees, which had only just grown a few leaves, were instantly shredded and brought crashing down, with dirt falling like a heavy compactor. Enemy shells scored a direct hit on a neighboring unit's bunker near our base, wounding 2 soldiers. After the barrage, they urgently called out to each other to give first aid to the wounded. What a close call! Immediately, Officer Sue ordered us to move to another base about an hour's march away, which had relatively good pre-existing bunkers. That took up the entire night. We were utterly exhausted. Before we could even clearly see each other's faces in the morning, Officer Sue woke us up to run the sweep. Thinking we were going somewhere far, he led us out to an open rice field just a short distance from the base and urged everyone to smear themselves with mud and lie flat against the field banks, waiting for the artillery to calm down before assessing the situation. When the enemy artillery shifted fire, we scrambled back to our bunkers. All day long inside the bunker, we listened to the roaring engines of various enemy aircraft and the thunderous explosions of bombs and artillery on the other side of the river, the very place we had crossed just yesterday. By nightfall, we received orders to cross the river back to Bao Dung. No one understood why. As soldiers, we only knew how to obey orders. Only much later did I learn that the higher command had intended to move us closer to Saigon, but that order was suspended. The unit that received us was named Regiment 770, similar to the Logistics Regiment 770 of the Regional Command, abbreviated as B70, the Suburban Commando and Guerrilla Unit. Back when Ngo Dinh Diem was alive, he had put a high bounty on anyone who could capture a 770 Viet Cong. The unit commanders were Company Commander Nam Ngoc and Deputy Company Commander Bai Nhiep. The unit had a political officer, but he had just sacrificed his life. Introducing the unit, Mr. Nam Ngoc said that B70 was a mobile unit of the sub-region operating over a vast area with the primary mission of clinging to the bases at Lai Khe, Ben Cat District and Dongdu, Cu Chi District. Mr. Nam told us, "You have arrived at the unit during a fierce time. After the Tet Offensive, the enemy has recovered and launched counterattacks. They are conducting continuous sweeps and raids, shelling day and night across all territories. Therefore, everyone must always be ready to fight." The military situation in the area was extremely critical. Our sub-region was under fierce enemy pressure and suffered heavy losses. Many areas were completely cleared of local guerrillas, or only a few men remained. Many local army units were down to 1/3 of their strength. Some companies had only 20 to 30 fighters left. There were regiments that, when gathered, could barely form a single battalion. Some independent units were down to just a few individuals, and some were entirely wiped out. On the Bien Hoa side, the 1st and 2nd Commando Battalions had only 40 to 50 fighters left, forcing them to merge into the 12th Battalion, and were later assigned to the 113th Commando Regiment. Our unit strength was highly unstable. In mid-1968, we managed to gather over 60 men, but after just the first 7 to 8 days of July, only 42 remained, and by November, we were down to just 14 men. Starting from late 1968, logistics supply became incredibly difficult. Our unit fell into a dire situation. No porridge to sip, no salt to eat, and no medicine to treat the sick. The unit's underground network was uncovered and many of our bases were destroyed. Due to the tight enemy encirclement, we had to disperse our forces to the absolute thinnest margin. The largest combat team consisted of only 6 to 7 men, while most had only 3 to 4, just to preserve our forces and make logistics supply manageable. For a long time, the Long Nguyen Forest had been a primary target for enemy sweeps. They struck day and night. The situation in Daoting, Bensuk, Pujiao, Tan-An, and Tan Uyen was no better. All areas known as our rear base were overrun by the enemy. Once bustling villages like villages 10, 11, and 13 were completely burned and destroyed. As for the citizens, the enemy relentlessly forced them into strategic hamlets to drain the water to catch the fish. Every residential area had U.S. advisors, pacification teams, security forces, civil defense, armed youth, Phoenix and Swan intelligence operations, and informants. They oppressed the people, intensified psychological warfare, and dropped leaflets calling for defection. From OV-10 planes and helicopters, loudspeakers bled out the names of Viet Cong cadres and liberation troops, urging them to surrender. Company Commander Nam Ngoc had the appearance of a scholar. He was quite tall, fair-skinned, with very gentle eyes. His southern accent was somewhat heavy but clear. He introduced himself as 30 years old from An Dien and had followed the revolution since 1960. To help us integrate, he wholeheartedly guided us in fieldcraft. From digging bunkers, camouflaging and erasing tracks, to marching techniques, careful observation, and listening to detect enemy ambushes, as well as gathering firewood, selecting wild vegetables, and digging wild tubers to fight hunger. He even told us how to handle the worst-case scenarios, determined never to let ourselves fall into enemy hands. Fresh from the north, listening to Mr. Nam brief us on the situation, we were like ducks listening to thunder, completely bewildered. But through real experience, the knowledge he shared proved incredibly practical, opening our minds. We learned our very first lesson. In a pocket zone, to preserve your life, you must maintain absolute secrecy. Go unnoticed. Stay unseen. Returning to the unit, we thought we would be fully equipped with weapons. But no, everything was scarce here. Our first meal with rice consisted of just one small bowl per person, shared equally, along with wild sour leaf soup mixed with Cambodian canned fish. The second meal was wild butterfly leaf porridge with just a few scattered grains of rice, and fried nan tubers with peanut oil, smelling slightly burnt. We all thought, so the resistance life begins. Fortunately, the unit still had 5 veterans from the south. Among them, 3 were Saigon commandos who had participated in the Tet Offensive. They were also very enthusiastic in teaching us combat experiences. But unfortunately, having just gotten to know each other for nearly a month, except for Mr. Nam and Mr. Bay, the remaining 3 were reassigned by higher command back into Saigon for operations. From then on, we became local soldiers, or what they called local troops, just a bit more than militia and guerrillas. As for hardships and sacrifices, no one could predict the future. During many enemy sweeps, M41 and M48 tanks, bulldozers, and M113 or M118 armored vehicles led the way, with infantry following behind. Whenever they suspected anything, the enemy would surround the area and lay down a suppressive barrage like sheets of rain. Many times, we were just a few steps away from the American soldiers, clearly hearing them jabbering to one another, smelling their cigarette smoke, and hearing the clanking of their metallic gear. Yet, we didn't dare make a move. It was truly a interlocking tooth-and-comb war, with so many situations that made us want to both laugh and cry. Having just arrived at the unit for 5 days, still completely green, we were already relentlessly hunted by the US and South Vietnamese forces. We didn't know where the leak came from, but enemy aircraft blared through loudspeakers. North Vietnamese soldiers who have just infiltrated, drop your weapons and surrender to return to the national righteous cause. They called out the names of so many Viet Cong cadres across all ranks that we didn't even know. The psychological warfare planes, the OV-10s and L-19s, flew back and forth as if they could see right through those hiding below. Day and night, they dropped leaflets and broadcasted surrender appeals using intimidation to shake the morale of anyone who was wavering or faint-hearted. It was so strange. We couldn't understand how the enemy knew the names of so many of our commanders so thoroughly. Occasionally, enemy planes would drop leaflets featuring photographs of our leaders alongside insidious, seductive messages. Many leaflets printed images of defected cadres, such as Senior Colonel Tam Ha, political commissar of the 5th Division; Bui Kong Tuong, member of the Ben Tre Provincial Propaganda Department; musician Doan Chin, son of the famous musician Doan Chuan; and Mai Van So, the twin brother of diplomat Mai Van Bo; or images of our fallen soldiers with bodies scattered everywhere, or our soldiers captured, tortured, and disemboweled. Along with that was the boasting of the power and triumph of the US and South Vietnamese forces. Unluckily for us, just 2 days after moving to a base in An Dien, someone from a neighboring unit defected. Instantly, enemy planes rushed in, dropping bombs all day long. This was followed by a relentless barrage of artillery from unknown coordinates, and then swarms of helicopters brought troops in for a sweep. My comrades and I had to run for our lives. 1969 was a year of grief, arguably the most painful year throughout the entire resistance war against the US to save the nation. Every few days, someone who couldn't bear the hardships would waver and desert our ranks. There were those who simply fled the battlefield to return home to make a living, but there were also cowards and traitors who guided the enemy to attack and destroy our bases. Many enemy leaflets even printed pictures of these defectors guiding South Vietnamese soldiers on combat tactics. In early August 1969, not even 2 days after Officer Nam led us to An Pu, Chu Chi, defectors guided the US and South Vietnamese forces straight into our base. They moved through the jungle extremely quietly, stopping right at an entrance to the tunnels. At first, they called for our surrender, then they dropped tear gas canisters down. Fortunately, no one was inside the tunnel. In fact, Sensing the movement, our comrades there had already cleared out beforehand. Next, they dropped satchel charges down into the tunnels. On our side, we quickly moved out to the banks of the Saigon River and submerged ourselves in the water. We stayed immersed in the water, enduring the ordeal for the entire day. From then on, we no longer stayed in the tunnels but chose a highly mobile option, constantly moving to avoid being encircled by the enemy. During 1969 and 1970, many of our revolutionary networks in the area were exposed, arrested, and killed due to traitors' informants. Villages and hamlets in Laike, Andien, Tanan, Tantuyen, Anfu, and Nuanduk were completely leveled. The enemy forced the population into strategic hamlets, then fenced them in with various types of barbed wire and planted numerous types of landmines to prevent the people from contacting the revolution. Day after day, the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces flexed their military muscle, aggressively launching search and destroy and drain the water to catch the fish operations. Living in such conditions, where bombs plowed the earth and artillery shredded the trees, not a single day passed without casualties among our soldiers and guerrillas. There were many tragic cases where we had just buried our fallen comrades the day before, only for American bombs to strike during the night and unearth their bodies. According to Mr. Nam, we learned that our unit originally had over 60 comrades. However, to adapt to the harsh conditions of the battlefield, the unit was forced to disperse into multiple combat teams across Cu Chi, Andien, Long Nguyen, Ben Cat, Tan An, and Tan Tuyen. Although each team was granted full autonomy for independent operations and lived in extremely miserable conditions, not a single person defected to the enemy. Inside the unit, there were soldiers from the north, the center, and the south alike. Before the 1969 Tet Offensive, only about 10 Southern comrades remained. By the time we arrived, there were only 5 left. Luckily for us, Company Commander Nam Gok and Deputy Commander Beng Yep were locals. Before 1968, the unit had over 100 men, with more than 70% being locals. During the first 15 days of the 1968 Tet Offensive, the unit was down to just over 20 men. After receiving multiple waves of reinforcements, including inner city operatives whose identities were exposed and recruits from the north, the strength rose to over 50. Following the buffer phase from June 1968 to early 1969, the unit gradually depleted. Some months, only 12 men remained, as reinforcements could not keep pace. When the 8 of us arrived, it was already the 5th reinforcement wave of 1969, bringing our strength back up to over 40, precisely 42 officers and soldiers. By mid-July 1969, the 2 combat teams at Dong Du, Cu Chi, were completely wiped out, with everyone sacrificing their lives. The 5-man Andien team lost 4, leaving Mr. Beng Yep as the sole survivor. The Ben Cat team had 3 men left, but by late August 1969, the sub-region reassigned all 3 into the inner city. The teams in Tan An and Tan Tuyen all reported casualties. Our 2 teams in Long Nguyen were the largest, 8 fighters. In early August 1969, the unit received 4 more new recruits, bringing our total to 26 active fighters. Mr. Nam organized us into 6 teams of 4 men each, divided into 2 platoons. Mr. Nam stayed in Long Nguyen, Lai Khe, while Mr. Bay took charge of Van Dien, Cu, Chi. However, because the Cuchi area, including North Cuchi, South Cuchi, and Dongdu, was continuously and fiercely raided by the enemy, Mr. Bay's platoon lost 4 fighters just 5 to 6 days after crossing over, and 2 others were wounded and had to be moved to the rear. Fortunately, our platoon under Mr. Nam Ngok's command in Benkat, clinging to the Lai Khe base and Route 13, primarily conducted reconnaissance on bases and organized mine traps. This allowed us to avoid direct clashes with the enemy, resulting in no casualties yet. Despite having to disperse our forces and suffering casualties, both platoons managed to organize numerous engagements. We constantly carried out mobile ambushes, set mine traps, and audaciously attacked enemy stations, outposts, and patrol squads along Route 13, the edge of the Baodung forest, the roads leading to the Rachbap and Lai Khe bases, Route 8 in Dongdu, and the villages in Tan Putrung, North Cuchi, North Tudao Mot, Tan Uyen, and South Bao Bang. These battles, though small, wore down the enemy's strength. After each engagement, our underground network reported back the enemy's losses, and most importantly, that the enemy troops were always in a state of constant anxiety, terrified of when they might be ambushed. Many operations that the South Vietnamese forces planned to launch into the jungle had to be postponed just to wait for U.S. reinforcements. By the end of 1969, our unit was down to just 16 active fighters. Fully grasping the directive from our higher command, do not openly confront the enemy, meaning do not expose yourselves to fight off enemy sweeps like regular infantry. Cling to the territory and only launch attacks when an opportunity arises. Mr. Nam divided us into teams of 4. Each team was stationed relatively far apart, which required being beyond the range of a heavy machine gun, about 2 to 3 kilometers. Communication with one another was only permitted at night. The teams applied highly flexible combat tactics, all with the sole purpose of making sure the enemy could never eat in peace or sleep in comfort. Utilizing surprise tactics, we focused our attacks on the American troops. We didn't know how it was elsewhere, but in our sector, if they tripped a mine trap and just a single soldier was killed or wounded, the Americans would immediately halt their sweep. They would then call in airstrikes to drop bombs and order artillery to shell grid coordinates. They furiously blasted every area they suspected. Therefore, after setting up a mine ambush, we absolutely had to run as far away as possible. This, too, was a vital lesson from real combat. An unexpected victory in North Saigon, Gia Dinh. Our unit held a specific ritual for every time we went into battle. That was the oath-taking ceremony. Perhaps because of this, many people mistakenly thought that we were holding funeral services for one another before launching an attack. The ritual went like this. The combat team, if it consisted of 4 men, would stand in a horizontal line before the liberation flag draped over a tree branch or a bamboo stalk. A portrait of Uncle Ho, only about the size of a palm, was attached just below the gold star. One by one, each person stepped forward, raised their hand, and solemnly declared their oath. I, just that, without stating the full name. a soldier of the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, swear to fight to my very last drop of blood for the independence and freedom of the fatherland. Why was it for the fatherland and not of the fatherland? Many comrades wondered about this, but no explanation was ever given. We only knew that if we said it wrong, the commander would demand we say it again. When I went to the north, I met many commando officers and soldiers from the anti-American war era. When asked about this ritual, every single one of them just smiled knowingly, and that expression showed it was a universal ritual. Performing the send-off ceremony before going into battle made every soldier's heart stir. They were all acutely aware of their mission. Though it was a formality, it was a sacred symbol for those suicide squads. In those days, an AK rifle with double-taped magazines was slung across the chest. On the left hip was the ammunition pouch. On the right was the satchel charge bag. Everyone tried to pack it bone dry full, 10 to 12 charges with TNT or 16 to 19 fists with C4 compound. Attached to the bag strap were 2 rolls of bandages in case of injury and 50 safety pins for locking mine detonators. 4 duckbill grenades were clipped to the belt, a dagger on the right, a K-54 pistol with 3 magazines pressed against the abdomen, and, not forgetting, a thumb-sized packet of rock salt to suck on if wounded instead of drinking too much water. Of course, commandos always went into battle bare-chested for camouflage. If we died, or as we say, sacrificed our lives, there would only be a pair of boxers on our bodies. That was the only property of a commando soldier. None of us had a penicillin vial containing a slip of paper with our name and age like the infantry men later did. A commando's preparation for his own death was just that simple. There was a reality that we soldiers from the north entering the southeast only knew that we had to fight until the Americans quit, fight until the puppets topple. But we had no idea which U.S. military unit we were approaching at the Lai Khe or Dong Du bases. It wasn't until February 1970, when the U.S. troops at Lai Khe withdrew to their country, that we realized we had been clashing with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and at Dong Du, it was the 25th Infantry Division, Tropic Lightning. These units were all the pride of America. In mid-June 1969, Mr. Nam called me to go with him to reconnoiter the Lai Khe base. We set off at 7 p.m. Mr. Nam led the way, and I followed behind. Crossing Route 13 and passing several hills flattened with fallen trees, we stopped upon encountering a heavily wooded swamp. The 2 of us stripped off our long clothes, wearing only boxers, and began wading through the swamp. Whatever Mr. Nam did ahead, I repeated behind him. A long while later, Mr. Nam signaled for me to submerge myself completely in the swamp and smear mud on my face. Done. The 2 of us continued to press forward. Wading through mud was extremely difficult. In the north, wading and submerging only involved paddy field mud, but here it was a swamp with mud up to our waists and even deeper. Our pacing slowed down because the enemy was right ahead. Mr. Nam signaled for me to stop. As it turned out, there were mines planted in the bushes. Mr. Nam gently disarmed them, then pinned them back. Just like that, we neutralized 6 mines. Suddenly, flares shot up, illuminating a vast space. we quickly submerged ourselves into a clump of bushes and stayed there until the following evening. At around 8 p.m., we infiltrated again. Spending a whole day and night submerged in the mud was incredibly uncomfortable, but what else could we do? Next night, we managed to get close to the first perimeter fence when Mr. Nam signaled to turn back. We trudged our way out, but the path out was harder than the way in. This was because we had to wait for the enemy flares to die down, retrace our tracks from the previous day, and simultaneously erase our trail. Near dawn, we finally made it back to the opposite bank. Reaching the spot where we hid our clothes, we couldn't put them on because our bodies were covered in mud, so we just carried our clothes like that as we walked. Near noon, after evading several rounds of nosy enemy helicopters, Mr. Nam brought me to a low jungle area where there was a carefully camouflaged bunker. A bit further away was a stream with flowing water. Around us, many bushes had sprouted green leaves. We took the opportunity to wash off all the mud. Thanks to the long walk, the mud stuck on our bodies had dried completely. We only needed to rub gently with our hands and the mud fell away in large flakes. Unknowingly, this became our downfall. I was leaning my back against the bunker wall to sleep when Mr. Nam tapped my shoulder. I startled and opened my eyes, and Mr. Nam signaled, "Enemy!" I bolted up, peering through the crack of light at the bunker door. There really was the enemy. About 100 meters away from us, a squad of American soldiers. These were commandos. Perhaps they had detected a mine, so a bare-chested American soldier wearing a steel helmet was kneeling on one knee, making motion to sweep for mines. The remaining soldiers followed behind, advancing while staying on high alert. I raised my rifle, gently lowering the selector switch to full automatic. Mr. Nam signaled for me to switch it back to semi-automatic. His hand rested on my shoulder, squeezing gently. He whispered just loud enough for me to hear, stay calm, Neng." I held my breath. The mine-sweeping soldier filled my front sight. The distance closed in. I was about to pull the trigger, but Mr. Nam squeezed my shoulder tightly. Stay calm. Only about 30 meters left. I could clearly see the soldier's abdomen. Mr. Nam released his hand from my shoulder and tack! I squeezed the trigger. The soldier flipped backward onto the ground. Then, out of nowhere, bursts of AK fire erupted, crisp and resounding. Caught by surprise, the enemy scrambled to the rear. "Quick!" Mr. Nam ordered. Like a squirrel, he burst through the bunker door, leapt out, and ran toward the American's body. I jumped out right after him. Mr. Nam quickly looped a nylon cord around the American's neck while I grabbed the AR-15/16 rifle. Then we retreated back into the bunker. The two of us braced our feet against the wall, dragging the American close to the bunker entrance. And just like that, we no longer feared the enemy's artillery shelling. Opening the enemy's backpack, inside were a few cans of food, lightweight field gear, a roll of needle and thread, and especially a wallet. Inside the wallet were a few dollar bills and a photograph of a girl with shoulder-length hair, likely the soldier's girlfriend. Mr. Nam only took a few cans of food and the canteen, stuffed the soldier's other belongings back into his backpack. As for the rifle, he disassembled it and left it in the corner of the bunker. Once everything was done, it was exactly when the enemy's artillery began shifting fire so they could enter to retrieve the body. Taking advantage of this moment, we opened the second bunker door and leapt out, running for our lives, running and completely forgetting about death. I followed close behind Mr. Nam, nearly losing my breath. We crossed Route 13, jumping over the drainage ditch without worrying about exposing our positions, and finally managed to get into the jungle. Above us, enemy aircraft swarmed the sky, but perhaps they were focused on the spot where the soldier had just been shot, so they didn't notice us. Mr. Nam led me to a base. He looked forward and backward, detecting nothing unusual, then crawled under a pile of fallen trees to find a bunker. Lying behind him, I felt as though he were a mole. His hands cleared away the leaves, and finally he found the bunker entrance. We descended into the bunker, and only then did we calmly sit and catch our breath. With no watch, the sun had already slipped into the afternoon. Night came all too slowly. The two of us opened a can of bread to share, then took the opportunity to lean against the bunker wall to wait for total darkness before finding our way back to the unit. 8. Sharing hardships. Mr. Nam knew the ways well, but it wasn't until past midnight that we made it back to the base. 2 weeks later, I received a piece of pelure paper about the size of 3 fingers, signed Certificate of American Killing Hero, 3rd Class. The entire unit celebrated with a meal of watery butterfly leaf porridge and dried fish. To boost the recruits' morale, the unit launched an emulation campaign. Look for Americans to wipe out, find puppets to fight. The combat teams competed with each other to set mine traps to destroy the enemy. Within just our first 4 months in the unit, we new recruits all achieved the title of American Killing Hero and clung to our ground even more resiliently. For recruits from the north newly arrived, being guided by seasoned commanders allowed us to mature rapidly. In mid-1970, Mr. Namgok swapped places with Mr. Beng Yep to go to Kuchi, and by the end of that year, he sacrificed his life. The unit only had Mr. Bay left as the sole southerner to take over command. Mr. 2, the leader of Team 4, a Haiphong native, and I were assigned as deputies. To Mr. Bay, the war situation in 1970 to 1971 in the South remained intensely fierce, although many main force units of the regional command had returned to the southeast, creating a new theater dynamic. The enemy's strength was still potent and they remained highly aggressive. In our territory, the enemy was utterly frantic. In the sky, aircraft of all types took turns bombing any target, real or fake. On the ground, tanks, armored vehicles, and large numbers of U.S. and South Vietnamese troops swept and crushed the countryside and the long Nguyen forest, which they suspected to be a resistance base. Accompanying them was the artillery from Dong Du, Tan Pu Trung, Lai Khe, Ratchpap, and Phu Loi. Competing to fire support without sparing ammunition, we were few. The enemy was many, and the lack of guaranteed logistics forced us into a corner, short on all types of ammunition. For those with the most AK ammunition left, it was only 60 rounds. B-40 rockets were down to just 3 or 4 rounds. We lacked explosives, mine detonators, and slow-burning fuses. Therefore, we had to economize. Many times, an opportunity to strike the enemy arose, but we had to evade them very quickly. The hardship was that the higher command desperately needed our gunfire to reinforce the people's confidence. This was an order. It forced us to think of a way to comply. To create explosions, we could only use mine traps, which both economized ammunition and caused panic among the enemy. Many times, we just planted a few grenades with short and slow-burning fuses, yet still managed to destroy the enemy. Occasionally, using grenades as booby traps to kill and wound a few American or puppet soldiers made them even more infuriating, while the pacification forces and militia became increasingly terrified of commandable agents. Those minor scattered engagements under conditions of absolute scarcity were already very good. Amidst the ammunition shortage, we got lucky. That day, at nearly 3 a.m., during my guard shift, I detected low crouching silhouettes running toward me. My rifle was ready, but upon hearing the correct sign and countersign password, I recognized Long, a Haiphong native, a courier from a friendly unit. He gasped out, "There's a group of frontline volunteers carrying ammunition who need protection. Please help us." So I woke the comrades up and followed Long through the jungle toward Trang Sich. The distance to the rendezvous point was quite far. We marched for so long that we could vaguely see each other's faces without relying on the light of flares anymore. We met the volunteer group of 20 men and women, with 2 people carrying one heavy DKB rocket trunk. A middle-aged man slung a Chinese wooden stock AK, introducing himself as Han, the group leader. He told me, "We need to get this cargo across Route 13, as close to Lai Khe as possible." I understood the mission immediately and agreed to help them. Time flew too fast. Dawn was already breaking. The thud, thud, thud sound of helicopter rotors warming up over in Lai Khe could already be heard. The commandos usually woke up very early. As such, it would be impossible to move further, so I told Mr. Han, "It's morning, brother. We must conceal the troops." So we split into 5 groups, each of us taking charge of 4 people from the volunteer group, dispersing relatively far apart so that if a bomb struck, one group might perish, but the others would survive. Next, we slipped down beneath the clumps of jungle trees that had been crushed by enemy tanks just the day before, then quickly covered ourselves with camouflage leaves. Throughout the whole day, no one was allowed to speak to anyone because we all feared enemy detection. Fortunately, all the brothers and sisters in the volunteer group maintained strict discipline. So, a long day passed quickly. Night fell very slowly. It was agonizing. Then darkness finally took over completely, and the flares in Lai Khe blazed up again. We gathered our forces. Only one brother in the ammunition transport group had been grazed on the calf by a stray artillery fragment. Unlucky, but still fortunate because the fragment didn't stick. He just needed a tight bandage and walked with a slight limp on the battlefield, being grazed on the skin by bullets, bomb fragments, or mines was just like catching a common cold. It didn't count as being wounded. The marching formation remained smooth. I must also mention a sensitive matter, having to lie perfectly still all day was quite difficult for the women. Consequently, our comrades had to lead the group to wade through a few streams, giving them a short break so the sisters could dry their clothes before moving on. Marching in total silence, everyone trudged along, avoiding making any noise. I must admit, the brothers and sisters of the frontline volunteers were incredibly resilient athletes. Two people carrying a heavy DKB rocket trunk, yet not a single person complained. On the contrary, they obeyed all our instructions to maintain secrecy. Even their breathing was highly responsible. It wasn't until past 3 a.m. that we finally reached the assembly point. Our comrades urgently hid the rockets and quickly split into small groups to find hiding places. Another day of lying in wait. During this free time, anyone who could sleep did so, while the rest watched swarms of Ka-Ro, Ka-Nok, Ka-Lep, and OV-10 aircraft packing the sky. It wasn't just us who were used to this sight. The brothers and sisters in the volunteer group were also very calm. They patiently lay still, wishing for time to pass quickly. Then came the time when darkness took over completely. The flares turned festive again, and we called out to each other, "Back along the old road we go." Before we parted ways, Mr. Han said, "We know you guys are running short on ammunition, so we'd like to give you a few basic loads as a keepsake." Then he handed us a backpack packed tight with ammunition. As it turned out, the 20 brothers and sisters in the group had unanimously agreed among themselves that each person would leave behind 2 magazines, 60 rounds for us. When you're starving for ammunition, receiving a gift like this was better than striking gold. On behalf of the unit, I thank the group and wish to see them again soon. I don't know if it was destiny or not, but almost every month we acted as liaisons, guiding transport volunteer groups carrying ammunition to cross Route 13, wade through the Titin and Saigon rivers, and reach the assembly point safely. There were so many trips, but I only remember this specific memory because 2 days later, those very DKB rockets we helped transport were fired straight into the Lai K base. In April 1972, before participating in the attack on Tudao Mo Town, we had the chance to meet one of the 20 frontline volunteers from that day. Her name was Ut Bey, 3 years older than me from Long An. If she were alive today, Sister Ut would be 74 years old. Meeting each other again, we shook hands with overwhelming joy. Hearing Sister Ut tell her stories, I realized that those ammunition transport volunteers were far more heroic than us. They silently endured and accepted sacrifices. Definitely not for a Medal of Honor pinned on their chests. Having more AK ammunition, I distributed it among the comrades in the unit, but it was also thanks to that trip helping the volunteer group that we discovered a few unexploded bombs, which immediately gave us the idea of sawing them open to harvest the explosives. And after that day, all of our comrades actively went hunting for unexploded bombs and dud artillery shells to saw, for explosives to make satchel charges, and mines. Nowadays, anyone hearing this section would be frightened to death. But back then, we successfully sawed many unexploded bombs and dud shells while still ensuring absolute safety. Regarding the sawing of enemy bombs and artillery shells, today Mr. Nguyen Hu Hung, a soldier of Regiment 113 and former deputy director of the Vinh Phuc Department of Health, remains a man of vast experience. And as for carrying artillery shells to strike the enemy base at Bien Hoa Airport, Mr. Pham Van Ninh, former head of the grassroots cadre department of the Vinh Phuc Provincial Party Committee's organizing board, a commando artilleryman of Regiment 113, knows far more. Our unit was stationed right next to the Lai Kay base, along Route 13 from Bao Bang down to Ben Cat and all the way to Tudamot Town. Enemy checkpoints were densely scattered everywhere. Moving around during the daytime, the enemy utilized high-powered binoculars for long-range observation. The moment they detected any movement, they would open fire immediately. Not just with a few bursts of heavy machine guns, but with at least half an hour of mortar barrages and concentrated artillery. The Americans routinely fired ammunition without sparing a single round. Because of this, we had to disperse our forces into the absolute thinnest margins. Starting from early October 1970, as we entered the dry season, the enemy intensified their patrols day and night. They deployed commando and reconnaissance teams, both American and South Vietnamese, to hunt down the Viet Cong. They possessed all kinds of modern machinery and technical equipment, but the most formidable remained the civil defense and armed youth forces guarding the checkpoints, oppressing the citizens on every road and in every corner of the hamlets. The pacification teams, along with the Swan and Phoenix intelligence networks, utilize countless schemes to entice, manipulate, and spread fabricated news to divide and draw the citizens away. Defectors and those harboring hatred toward the revolution exerted every effort to uncover and destroy our revolutionary networks. This concludes part 2. Thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support the channel.